Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, and we are super excited to have Megan Edge back on our podcast today, discussing plant medicine and nature as medicine. And I was discussing with her before the show how I was fortunate enough to have a class in pharmacy school all the way back in 1991 called pharmacognosy. And pharma means drug, ognosy means knowledge in Greek. And basically it was how drugs are mostly sourced from plants. And after I took that class, the professor died shortly after, and they couldn't find anybody to replace him. So I don't think the class has ever been replaced 30 plus years later. And I was so fortunate to have that class and learn about how important plants are to medicine. So Megan, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me back again. I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background for the people who didn't see the first podcast.
My background is varied. I'm a Gemini, and the best quote I've ever heard for a Gemini is a busy mind in many places. So what we're going to be talking about today is part of the work that I do as a healer. And that part is the natural healing, plants as medicine, essential oils, nature as medicine. And then I also have a whole other area of work that I do, which is in counseling, intuitive counseling, spiritual counseling, helping people through trauma and transition and grief and healing, mind, body, and soul healing. And I've combined these two passions of mine into an overarching healing modality, which is that we as individual human beings have such a capacity to be well, to thrive, and that it's not rocket science to know how to do this, but we've forgotten. And so my passion these days is in reminding people of their capacity to be well and the different easy ways that they can do it through the plants as medicine, food as medicine, nature as medicine.
So tell us a little bit about plants as medicine and food as medicine, nature's medicine. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Was it Hippocrates that said, "Let food be our medicine and medicine"? Am I saying this right? And medicine be your food? What am I?
Yes. Let food be thy medicine. And let medicine be thy food. Well, at least the first part of that's correct. Let food be thy medicine.
Yeah.
And you have to remember that when Hippocrates was saying that, there were no pharmaceutical companies. No. There was no single miracle pill that was going to fix everything and anything that a person might be experiencing. Food was medicine. Medicine came from the plants and the minerals that are around us. And there was a really fundamental understanding of how important it is what we put into our bodies and the effect that those things can have on us. And interestingly, when we fast forward to today, and I do a lot of work advocating for my clients in the mainstream medical system, helping them to understand what it is that is being offered to them, helping them to start really thinking critically about the kinds of medications that are being prescribed and the kinds of treatments that are being prescribed. Because most people go into a state of amnesia when they step into a hospital or a doctor's office. So to have somebody who can ask the pertinent questions can be really helpful for a person trying to understand everything. So going fast forward to today, where we do have this idea that an inert pill coming out of a bottle with a prescription with our name on it is going to solve all of our problems. And we have forgotten that the foods that we put in our bodies, as well as the medications we put into our bodies, have an impact. That's why there's that long list of side effects. And at this point in my career, I don't call them side effects anymore. I just call them effects, because so many people I know who are on these kind of medications, these prescription medications, are living with these what have been called side effects, but are actually the effect of the medication. And it's not to say don't ever take a prescription medication, although my personal preference is that I won't, knowing what I know. But there are places and spaces where it could be appropriate for the short term, but equally learn what you're eating, learn what you're putting into your body and the effects that has on you as well, so that you can create a healthy biome, a healthy terrain within your body.
Yeah, for sure. I agree 100%. And I'm going to add on to what you said about side effects, and you call it effects. I'm going to add on to this because a pharmacist, a fellow rogue pharmacist, I call us, that
I
doesn't
like that.
drugs to treat long-term disease, just like my wife and I. She says, let's stop watering it down. We were taught in pharmacy school about side effects. Let's stop watering it down. Really, what side effects are, they're toxicities. That's the poison working in your body.
Yeah.
That's a toxicity. So let's just get that out of the way right now. A side effect is a toxicity of the drug.
Yeah.
I think when it's explained that way, then people are a lot more cautious about the drugs. And I think by design, they termed the word side effects to kind of water it down and not make it as bad as calling it a toxicity.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm sure, because if you got a prescription and right there it said, and toxic effects are, and can include, right, anxiety on your anti-anxiety medication, suicidal thoughts on your antidepressant. These are toxic side effects. No, this is what is happening in your body when you're ingesting these medications, especially in the long term. And what's really unfortunate is that we have normalized these side effects as just normal parts of aging, for example, or normal parts of stress. And so we don't look to the source of these effects, and therefore we don't acknowledge or recognize them. Instead, we suffer with them, and the people around us suffer with them as well, especially with the SSRIs and that whole family of medications. It's horrific what's happening to people who are on those medications. I've spent 6 years advocating for one of my clients, who's also my aunt, to get her off of the vast number of various medications that had been layered one upon another, often to counteract the effects of the other medications that she was taking, right? So if anxiety was a production of one of the medications, then she was given an anti-anxiety medication on top of that. And her whole system was completely toxified, and she ended up with Parkinson's. I believe as a side effect of these medications. Fighting with the doctors to get them to even acknowledge the possibility that these drugs were not playing well together in her system, or could be the cause of her insomnia and her paranoia and her anxiety. It was worse than pulling teeth. I mean, I flat out had doctors tell me that I didn't know what I was talking about. And now I'm not a doctor and I haven't gone to medical school, but I'm looking at the same websites that they are. And I know that because I'm looking at their screens. It's the same information, but I'm looking at the information differently than they are. And I think that's where the divide starts to happen.
Well, and really, they've just been trained, most doctors in medical school, they have been trained to prescribe drugs to treat disease. And if it's not a drug, then it's surgery. That's the only option. They don't talk about diet. They don't talk about sleep. They don't talk about exercise. Now, I'm generalizing. There are doctors that probably do talk about that, or there are doctors that do. Those are definitely the good ones. But a doctor that doesn't ask you about your sleep, your diet, your exercise before prescribing a drug is not they're not a healer. They're a drug dealer, not a healer. And that's what we have in our medical system. And we all hide behind it. They all hide behind it and call it standards of care. Well, let's just remember these standards of care, Megan, are created by the drug companies and the insurance companies colluding to rip off patients and make themselves a profit.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't have to look very far to find the evidence of that. It's not hidden. You just follow the money. And maybe that's a term that's been overused, but it's the truth of it.
Right.
It doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint to solve the problem that people are giving you money for the pill that's supposed to, you create the problem and then you create the solution for the problem. But if people were healthy, if people got better, if we weren't told that these health conditions are a life sentence, we wouldn't continue to require the level of medicating that people are experiencing right now.
Those are just facts. And any doctor that says otherwise, they're lying to you.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into some specifics, okay? Because I geek out about this stuff and where drugs come from. That's just my pharmacist background, right?
Right.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, although you're an expert in this subject, so it should be pretty easy for you. When I think of the first drug that was isolated from a plant and patented, I think of Bayer aspirin. So let's go back to Bayer aspirin and what you know about the history of Bayer aspirin. Can you expand on that?
Well, you have put me on the spot.
Okay.
I got a bit of
you weren't ready for that. That's okay. That's okay.
I know where aspirin comes from. In terms of the history of the Bayer company, there's a lot of interesting history there in terms of association with the chemical companies at the time, the pharmaceutical companies at the time, and the colluding that was going on between the two of them with what was coming out of the world wars and the effects that we started to understand about things like mustard gas and other biologicals that were being used in the war as agents, right? Aspirin comes from the willow tree. It's from the bark of the willow tree. The isolate that becomes then aspirin and is then used as a panacea for absolutely everything has removed the intelligence from the plant. And I know for some people that might sound kind of woohoo, like plants are intelligent, but we are learning, in fact, that there is an intelligence in the plant world, and that plants themselves have certain intelligence. And the fact that if you were to make a tea out of willow bark, have willow bark tea for your headache or your pains, versus take an aspirin, you're not going to have an effect that is toxic from the tea in the same way that you could have an effect that could be toxic from the aspirin. So I'm not sure if that's answering some of your.
I will tell you. So it honestly, for putting you on the spot, you did amazing. In fact, I learned some things from you. Although I'm not really that surprised about the Bayer company and mustard gas and all that kind of stuff. I mean, when you look into the history of pharmaceutical companies, there's some nefarious stuff that has went on.
Yeah.
So let me just add to this a little bit. So aspirin is acetylsalicylic acid.
Right.
That's the active ingredient in aspirin. But just like you say, when the Native Americans would use aspirin, willow bark mixed up in tea, they'd steep it in tea and they'd use it for headaches. They'd use it for fevers. It worked wonderfully without the toxicities of GI bleeding, without the toxicities of ringing in the ears, tinnitus, without the toxicities of renal or kidney problems. Those toxicities didn't happen. Now, kind of like what you were talking about, the magic of plants. You know, when we're looking, you know, one of the big problems with big pharma, you know, trying to isolate the active ingredient in a plant is we don't know what we don't know. So, you know, you do a analysis on that plant and you find one of the ingredients and you start testing it. You're like, oh, well, acetylsalicylic acid works to lower the fever, it works for pain, and this is how it works, yada, yada, yada. But what we're missing is that there are other ingredients in that plant that are put there specifically to prevent toxicities. You know, I don't know what they are. We don't know what they are. You know, and there also might be something else in that plant that works synergistically with acetylsalicylic acid to make it work better without the toxicities. But again, we don't know what we don't know. So when you try to take a plant and isolate the active ingredient out of it, it's a problem. It's a big problem, and we see it constantly. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, or if you can add to that.
Absolutely. And it isn't only in the pharmaceutical world that this sort of thing happens. An isolating of a specific component of a plant that appears in vitro to have some kind of an effect that is neutralizing for pain or inflammation or whatever else it is. And then that is then pulled out and made into a medication and given to people. It also happens in the supplement world. And I want to use the example of turmeric, because most people now in North America are familiar with turmeric as a supplement. There are thousands and thousands of research studies that have been done on the benefits of turmeric. And you can go to GreenPubMed, that's the one. And you can find all of those studies. Sire J has put them all together into a huge archive, and all sorts of other natural medication or medicines as well. But what the supplement industry did is it isolated curcumin out of the turmeric root. And that in and of itself is a great compound, and it can do a lot of wonderful things. But unfortunately, the supplement industry isn't always honest either. And so you might be getting a powder that's also got other powders in it, like cellulose, to bulk it up, or you might be working with material that's not organic, or various other ways in which it can be made not to be as effective. What the studies are now showing us is that full turmeric, if you take the entire root of the turmeric, and turmeric is like ginger, they're of the same family, and you consume the entire root, the health benefits are multifold to simply taking a supplement of curcumin, even if you add black pepper to it. Black pepper makes curcumin more bioavailable in our bodies. But if you simply cook with turmeric, like many cultures do and have for tens of thousands of years, and you have a steady daily dose of turmeric, a pinch in your coffee, or however you're going to work with it, you're getting the benefit of all the compounds that we are now identifying in the turmeric. Some of these are neuroprotective. There's research being done on Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and dementia, and the benefit of introducing whole turmeric into a person's diet, or as a tincture, or as an oil. There's different ways that you can work with it. So the understanding that a whole plant has so many different characteristics and so many different components that work within our systems, because those components have been created by the plant to give the plant its best wellness, if you would. You know, the things that these components do for the plant, they do for us as well. So look, for example, at pine resin. This is another one. I love working with pine resin. Pine resin is that tacky stuff that comes off the tree when the tree gets a cut. And it's nature's Band-Aid. And it has anti-parasitic properties. It has antiviral properties, anti-inflammatory properties. It does all of these things to protect itself. The tree uses it to protect itself from pathogens. Well, when we work with it, the same thing happens for us. Like, it isn't just that plants are intelligent, it's that we are intelligent. And however you want to look at that.
Let's see,
that
Megan,
design,
you just locked up. Hopefully we get.
Oh, I see you frozen. Okay. What was this one? Okay. Oh. Stay tuned. Not sure what happened. I'm going to log out and log back in again. Okay.
Megan, can you hear me now?
I can hear you and I can see you.
There we are. Okay, you gotta love technology. We were patient about it and we got you back on. So
Okay.
I'm not sure what happened. So
It happens.
basically, what you're saying, my comment is this. When you say, plants have all these great ingredients in them. I love the pine resin one. One thing I love about our podcast, I learn something every time I interview a guest. And, when you say these things about plants and how they work in our body, and they work the same way in their, to protect the plant that they can to protect our body. My first response is, it's kind of a smart aleck response, but it's kind of like, well, duh. That's kind of how I respond about it.
Well, here's the thing. It's not rocket science.
No.
But it is something that we have forgotten or have been purposely distracted from knowing. Right?
That's probably more like it, huh?
Yes. Because if I understand that if I take care of myself and if I believe that it is my responsibility as a human being to do that, it's no one else's responsibility but mine, then I'm going to really be careful about what I put in my body. I'm not going to go and eat at McDonald's every day. We're going to badmouth McDonald's, but honestly,
yeah, but that's true.
It's true. We have documentaries already that have, we know this. What was it called? Super Size Me. If anyone's curious.
Yeah, that's a great show.
If you eat at McDonald's, think about what your grandmother used to tell you. She's brilliant. Your grandmother is amazing. You know why chicken soup is so good for you is because chicken soup, the marrow that comes out of the bones is full of collagen. There's minerals that are extracted when you make a broth. Those minerals are good for you. If you throw in some garlic and some onion, now you've got an antibiotic. That's a natural antibiotic that is not going to kill all the flora and fauna in your body. I mean, I guess we wouldn't even call it an antibiotic. We'd call it a biotic at that point.
Yeah, right. Not an antibiotic, but a biotic. Right.
Yeah. And I think, what I've come across when I explain to people about the importance of the food that they're putting in their body, the soil that food is grown in, working with essential oils that are pure medical grade essential oils, not the stuff you buy at the grocery store. I often get this kind of response. Well, but where's the evidence? Like, prove it to me. And I'll say, but you're willing to go and take a Tylenol because you have a headache rather than drink a glass of water with a pinch of salt in it. And you're not questioning what that's doing to your liver. You're not questioning why, if you're in the hospital, they're going to give you a Tylenol every 4 hours, whether you need it or not, or ask for it or not. You're not going to question that.
I love this discussion. And think about this. As a pharmacist, this is what I say anymore. I don't call myself smart. I don't call myself a scientist. I try to think rationally. Okay. Mm-hmm. I love your Tylenol example. I love your chicken soup example. How long have we used Tylenol? I don't know, 100 years.
Back to the Bayers and the aspirin, right? I mean,
basically it's a little, Tylenol was acetaminophen, it was after Tylenol, but not, or after aspirin, but not much. Mm-hmm. How long have we been talking about chicken soup is good for, when we're sick? How many grandmas, great-grandmas, great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmas have talked about that? There's the evidence. That's Absolutely. The evidence I need. It's like on our diet. You talk about McDonald's. Mm-hmm. Well, McDonald's isn't that bad, or XYZ processed food is not that bad. And yet when somebody eats like they'll eat they call it a crazy diet. Well, I only eat whole foods. I eat meat and vegetables only. That's all I eat. Well, where's the evidence that that's going to make you healthier? Oh, I don't know. Thousands of years of human evolution. That's the evidence.
Exactly.
That's all I need. Yeah. What did my great ancestors eat? Not McDonald's. They didn't eat food out of a box. They ate potatoes. They ate meat. That's what they did. So,
and they ate in the seasons.
Right. There were. I just at a metabolic health conference Saturday, one guy brought up a question. He brought up a question about, what what do I do with these blueberries that are the size of golf balls? He was exaggerating.
Oh, they are pretty big.
But yeah, I mean, right. Okay. All right. But, then the conversation went to this, we get blueberries year round. But, in the northern latitudes, where I'm at from Washington State, we had blueberries probably a month out of the year, in maybe August or so. I'm guessing. I don't really know the season. We didn't, and you didn't really have refrigeration, so you couldn't store them. So you only ate what you could eat without them rotting. They were very, squash or things like that. They were in the fall. There were things in season. There were outside of living, in warmer latitudes, in southern latitudes or around the equator, there weren't plants available year round.
No, there weren't. And when I talk about eating in the seasons, that's what I mean. Like when corn is available in August and September as opposed to January. Now, somewhere it's growing in January, like you're saying, like in maybe a southern climate. But my ancestors would have eaten fresh corn in September. Then they would have processed that fresh corn, and they would have either dried the kernels or maybe made it into a paste and dried it that way. They would have found ways of storing it, but what they were storing was the plant that was grown at the time that it was harvested. There was no truck ripening of anything.
No, not at all. Okay, so I want to go back to another specific drug. And since you did so well when I put you on the spot last time, I'm going to try to put you on the spot again. Not really, because I think you're going to answer this, but this one's very pertinent because it's aspirin. We've talked about it not really being a good drug for the last 30 plus years, and even to prevent cardiovascular disease, and aspirin a day, they've shown that the risks aren't worth it. But I want to go with a drug that is very popular, one of the most popular class of drugs ever. I want to go to the statins. I'm not sure if you know the history of the statins. But
I'm going to be very clear and transparent. I do not. So okay. I would love for you to share some of that with me.
I would love to. Okay. So the statins are Mevacor, Zocor, Crestor, Lipitor. They're known for lowering cholesterol and preventing cardiovascular disease. Okay.
Right.
And that's a whole other story about they don't work. I won't talk about that. I want to talk about its origins from a plant. So back in the 80s, 1987 specifically, lovastatin, Mevacor, the first statin was patented, and it was isolated from red yeast rice. Okay. And the drug company knew that for years and generations, red yeast rice was giving to support cardiovascular function. Okay. So they looked at this drug and they looked at what's the active ingredient. So they find an active ingredient, and then what do you know? It causes rhabdomyolysis, which is basically the breakdown of your muscle, and it causes liver toxicities. But red yeast rice did not do that.
Yeah.
So not even the whole thing that cholesterol, as you can imagine, Megan, cholesterol is not what causes cardiovascular disease. Cholesterol is natural in our bodies. It's natural in the food we eat. Shouldn't be vilified. That's for sure. But they found a drug to lower cholesterol. So they associate cholesterol with cardiovascular disease, and then they find a drug to lower it, and we have a magic. Okay.
Right.
So that's the history of statins and red yeast rice. So again, we are trying to play creator and figure out what's the active ingredient is in a plant that was not made by us.
Yes.
It's just not possible.
So interestingly, so we talk about the statins, then I'd love to go down the rabbit hole of the antidepressants, the anti-anxieties, all the SSRIs, this class of drugs, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, are not necessarily coming from plant research and plant isolated compounds, but from pesticides and herbicides. The pesticides and herbicides coming out of, again, going back to World War I and World War II and in the trenches, And a lot of these companies then developing, these pharmaceutical companies developing out of that effort. And because of what we could see that these chemicals did to people's personalities. So do I have that history right?
Yeah, you do. And honestly, I'm going to tell you, as a pharmacist, I don't know the specifics of the SSRIs.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I do know about most drug therapies. I wouldn't say most, but many of them, they've come out of the big oil and chemical manufacturers, because those companies are good at making byproducts, and a lot of them are byproducts from those industries. And when you look at the history of big pharma, including the Flexner report, John D. Rockefeller, which is the head of Standard Oil, he is the one that really pushed for big pharma. Yeah. And then we see what's happened today with basically that's being, big pharma has been controlled our medical care system, whether it be the education of our doctors and pharmacists and nurses, or whether it be, how they control the insurance industry, payment industry, major hospitals. They literally control them, and it was all by design. So that's what I do know. I don't know specifically about the SSRIs, but many of the drugs that's where they come from. It's a process where, in the oil industry, that they can make certain chemicals. They're good at it.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you have waste chemicals, what do you do with them? Well, what if you could turn it into something profitable
and make money? Right? Yeah, exactly. Right.
And so,
and now that you said something, Megan, I just realized I wish I knew what drug it was, but in my organic chemistry class, I just realized you hit the nail on the head. In my organic chemistry class, pre-pharmacy school, my professor talked about a synthesis reaction, where you basically make a chemical from other chemicals. And the end product ended up being a drug. And so, this is real. And he says, some oil chemist got a big bonus for doing this. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And unlike the plants, these are not things that are meant to be in our bodies. We don't produce them naturally. We don't have any kind of natural relationship with them. Excuse me. They didn't exist 100 years ago, 150 years ago. No one was eating them, right? They have been developed since, and then put into our environment, or put into our medicines, or put into our foods, or put onto our foods. Look at glyphosate rather. Awful what's happening, and how that percolates down into our water, our soil, our food. We're full of it. It's in our bodies, the microplastics. And I don't want to be painting this great big dire picture, but the reality is that this is what's happening. So the question that I sort of nail down to is, well, what can I do about it? And I don't mean what can I do to get plastics out of the environment? That's not going anywhere. What can I do to strengthen my terrain so that my body can better process those plastics and get them out as fast as possible? What can I do to avoid the poisons? It's not like, when we think about wellness, it doesn't take our body much to be well, but we have to stop poisoning it. And just let that land for a moment.
Yes.
If we stop putting the poisons into our bodies, and that's the poor quality foods, and it's the medications, and it's the EMFs, and it's all the other things that are around us. If we limit our exposure to it to the best of our ability, and we clear our bodies and we strengthen our bodies with the foods we're eating, then we will be healthy. Right? We won't get sick. My brother-in-law said to me recently, as he listed off all these medications he was on, he says, but at our age, everybody's on something. And I said, I'm actually not on anything.
Yeah, just normalize it. We've normalized it, like you said earlier in the podcast.
Yes.
Okay, Megan, we've only got about 15 minutes left, and I want to get into this. So, no, this is great. Great conversation. I want to get into foraging. Can we talk about foraging and what that means? And, I'm going to tell you, back to my pharmacognosy class, we would go into pictures. This is way before digital videos and digital pictures. So we would have to look at pictures and try to identify plants. Now, and I will tell you that my professor says, don't go out and try to identify plants unless you're an expert, and eat them unless you're an expert, because there are some plants that, mushrooms, for instance, you get muscarinic mushrooms and you will die. Some nightshade berries, things like that have atropine in them, you will die. So Tell me about foraging. That's when I think about foraging, that's what I think about. Am I on the right track?
I'm going to offer a rebuttal to your professor. And this may not land properly for people, but we'll see. There's very little in nature that is out to get you. There's very little in nature that can kill you just by you looking sideways at it. Yes, there are things that if you were to put them in large quantities that could cause problems. Absolutely. Are certain things poisonous to us? Yes, but not nearly as many as people think. And one of the things that I love doing is helping educate people around how user-friendly nature is, right? Instead of being fearful of it. You don't have to be an expert. There are some really, really good books that you can get that are not AI generated. You can certainly talk to people in your area who do know what is edible and what you should perhaps not eat, what is not highly digestible. I grew up in a foraging family. I grew up foraging mushrooms. I love some of the descriptions of some of the mushrooms, the names of them, death cap, maybe stay away from that one. It's edible once kind of a thing. But most mushrooms are edible. There are a few that are choice. Lots of them are just benign. They're going to be kind of slimy if you cook them. They're not going to have a lot of flavor. But the ones that are choice are really easy to identify. They're very specific. And if you go foraging with someone who knows what they're looking for, you can learn. These are the ones that you pick. Don't worry about the rest of them, but these are your chanterelles. You can't miss a chanterelle.
Yeah.
This is your king boletus. This is your morel. This is an oyster mushroom. These are mushrooms that I harvest. I go out into the forest and I harvest these mushrooms and I bring them home and I eat them. I use them for nourishment. I use them because they taste delicious. And I also use them as medicine. And mushrooms are becoming extremely popular in North America as medicine. People will go out and spend $50 or $60 on lion's mane supplements of powdered lion's mane. But probably the same people wouldn't know what to look for in the forest if they saw a lion's mane. Right. It's the same mushroom, and it's the same with our plants. I talk a lot with people about urban foraging, which is going out into your neighborhood, getting to know your neighbors, identifying the plants that are growing on the boulevards that are medicinal and that are edible. The lowly dandelion is one of my all-time favorites. Every part of that plant is edible and medicinal. What we've done is we've stigmatized them. We've created these lists of noxious or noxious weeds. And if you have those weeds on your property, your neighbor can get the bylaw officer to come and, give you a hard time. But if you understand what it is that you're seeing and how to work with those plants, you can learn and feel confident in working with the plants that are right in your neighborhood, learning how to work with elderberry, for example, or blackberry or raspberries, right? Learning how to grow herbs that you put into your food every day. And when I was saying earlier in the conversation, when I talk to people about this and their eyes kind of glaze over and they say, where's the evidence? Where's the proof? And it can't be that easy. I'm going to go to my doctor and get a prescription. I was like, well, but it is that easy. Yeah. It is that easy. Every day I have something in my food, in my water, like the water I'm drinking right now. I've got spearmint essential oil and orange essential oil. I've got usnea, which is old man's beard. That's really high in vitamin D. And I've got turmeric tinctures, which I make. I make all of these medicines and they're available through my Etsy store. I've taught myself over the years how to do this so that I could have sovereignty over my health. And I'm not saying that everybody has to do it this way, but you could buy from me and then you'd know that that the products were made from somebody who knew what they were doing. There's lots of easy ways that you can incorporate things like essential oils and herbs into your daily life. And you're going to feel the benefit. It's going to be better for you. Very simply stated. It's just going to be better for you to do it that way.
For sure. So tell us a little bit. I'm going to stream your website here. Tell us a little bit about of your website.
So I have two websites, and the one that you've pulled up there is Megan Edge Healing, and that's a lot of the healing work that I do with people that I said in the earlier part of the program. More of the intuitive counseling and therapies and energy healings and that sort of thing, spiritual healing. But there's a crossover with how we take care of our bodies and our souls, for that matter, through natural medicines. So healing medicines from nature, made from local plants, is what I create, how I create my products. And then the other website, and this website will take you to the other website, is Beyond the Garden Gate Botanicals. And that's where I do a lot of the work with nature as medicine and teaching people about how to identify plants and how to identify mushrooms and urban foraging and foraging. And then again, the products that I make from the items that I forage. And I'm very fortunate. I live near the ocean, so I also get to work with seaweeds, medicinal seaweeds, and seaweed as food, and then the forests. So I have a beautiful backyard that I get to play.
Yeah, I'll bet. I mean, you might have some dandelions growing and some upset neighbors that you have weeds, noxious weeds growing in your yard.
So every spring, my neighbor next door manually pulls all the dandelions out of his front lawn, while I harvest the dandelions that are in my front lawn, and I let them go to seed.
Right. That's awesome. Well, Megan, you've helped us realize our goal today of this podcast, which is to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. So I thank you for doing that.
You're very welcome. And thank you as well for having these conversations. They're so important.
If we can, listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning into Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Thursday to our midweek podcast, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you.